Welcome back to the Enter the System series. In this installment, we're going to be looking at the triangle stranglehold, one of the absolute most efficient and powerful of the submission systems that I teach. I teach 6 primary submission systems to my students, and the triangle is absolutely one of the most important of them all. I put a very, very heavy emphasis on triangle training at all levels among my students. Why? Well, undeniably, the triangle is among the most effective of submission holds in modern day competition, both mixed martial arts and grappling, both with and without a gi. It is very clear that the triangle is amongst the most versatile of all the submission holds that we use. It can be used in a tremendous number of different scenarios. It works equally well in both grappling and fighting, with and without a gi. It works well across all weight categories. This versatility is one of its primary appeals. In addition, as a general rule, I favor strangleholds over joint locks. In extreme situations, some athletes will be prepared to take extensive damage to their joints and continue fighting. However, in the case of strangleholds, no amount of courage or mental toughness will get you past the simple fact of strangulation inducing unconsciousness. So in a choice between a stranglehold and a joint lock, I generally favor going in the direction of strangleholds. There is a third element as to why I put such a heavy emphasis on triangle training among my students, and this has to do with their skill development. Triangles require us to develop an extraordinary degree of leg dexterity and coordination, much more so than the regular submission holds. These attributes of leg dexterity and coordination have a tremendous beneficial carryover effect into other areas of jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu is primarily a sport which involves using our legs to wrestle an opponent's upper body whenever possible. And the triangle is the quintessential example of this in operation. Every triangle is essentially the fight of my legs and hips against one of my opponent's arms and his head and shoulders. In this way, where I get to match my lower body strength against my opponent's upper body strength, I now have an excellent chance of overcoming bigger and stronger opponents. The triangle is among the best weapons for smaller, weaker athletes to take on and defeat more powerfully built adversaries. It's important to understand that, like all my approaches to submission holds, the triangle, as I use it and teach it, is bound up in a systematic approach. The triangle system that I advocate is a fairly simple 4-step system. It involves 2 main phases within that 4-step system. Step number 1 is always to create the critical 1 in, 1 out scenario that makes all triangles possible. The 1 in, 1 out refers to the idea that in any triangle, regardless of type, I must take one of my opponent's arms and his head and trap it within my legs, and at the same time force the other arm outside of my legs. So you always look to create these situations where one of your opponent's arms is trapped inside your legs and the other is held out outside of your legs. All triangles have this in common. The means by which we create this critical 1 in, 1 out scenario is mostly bound up with grip and kazushi, the art of off-balancing. This takes us immediately to step number 2 of the triangle system. This is where we shoot our legs into a trap triangle. Once we've created a scenario where we've got the 1 in, 1 out scenario accomplished, then it's all about the shot of our legs into the trap triangle. A trap triangle represents the first phase of the application of the triangle. This is the control phase, where we lock up our opponent's head and one arm and start holding their body in a way we will set up the next stages. There are 2 main methods to achieve the trap triangle. These are foot penetration methods, which usually occur when there is a longer distance between myself and my opponent, and knee penetration methods, which usually occur when the distance between myself and my opponent is somewhat closer. If you're going to call yourself a master of triangles, you must be highly competent in both. The idea behind a trap triangle is that we don't really have a true triangle at all. Rather, what we have is our feet crossed behind our opponent's back with the head and the arm trapped. So you have the most important element of a triangle, the head and the arm trapped and the other arm isolated away, but you don't yet have your legs locked in the full figure of four. Rather, you just have your ankles crossed behind his back. This represents the first phase of our triangle attack. Step number 3 of the triangle system is always to manage the adjustment from the trap triangle all the way through to a figure 4 triangle. This represents the second phase of triangle application, the so-called strangulation phase. The trap triangle will not strangle your opponent. It's only the transition to the figure 4 triangle, the complete triangle, which makes this possible. Many will be the time that the system gets completed at this stage. If the triangle should prove to be successful, congratulations, the match is now over. However, there will be a significant number of times when you will be unable to complete the strangulation phase. If this should occur, then we go into step 4 of the triangle system. If the triangle should prove inadequate for whatever reason, then we make a switch into joint locks. You have two choices. You can go after your opponent's arms. The most popular choices are Juji Gatame, straight arm locks, and Kimura variations. In addition, you can go down to the lower body, particularly if your opponent is standing and posturing up away from your triangle, which is a common form of defense. In these situations, we make a quick transition into various variations of Ashigarami, and from there we go into strong leg attacks. Bear in mind that the triangle system, which I espouse, is based around the use of 5 different forms of triangle. When most people talk about a triangle, all they really refer to is one form of triangle, the triangle from the front, usually employed from guard position and sometimes from various top positions such as mount or side control. However, a big theme of this video series will be the idea that there are in fact 5 separate forms of the triangle stranglehold. And if you're going to call yourself a master of this system, you must become highly competent in all 5. It's important to understand that of the 5 triangles, they are arranged in a hierarchy of importance, and they are divided into 2 categories, which are termed Category A and Category B. Let's look at Category A first, as these comprise the most important of the various triangles that we study and practice. Category A has as its most important element the front triangle. There is no question that even though I teach 5 triangles, the front triangle is the king of the 5. More people get finished by front triangles than probably all of the other triangles put together. And so the lion's share of our development and training is put into the front triangle. This we often refer to as Omote Senkaku. Senkaku just means triangle, and Omote from the front. The second most important triangle that we use is the rear triangle, or Ushiro Senkaku. This is a very important form of triangle whenever we've gotten behind people and we're looking to strangle. Very often, strangles with the arms prove to be difficult, and a quick switch to strangulations with the legs often gets great effect. In Category A, the third triangle, in my opinion, the third most important in the system overall, is the opposite-sided triangle, where we lock our triangles in what appears to be the wrong way, or an unconventional method. This is Hantai Senkaku, and it forms an excellent way of supplementing front triangle attacks which have been thwarted by our opponent's posture. We now come to Category B. Of the Category B triangles, we have the side triangle, Yoko Senkaku. This is very often seen in the sport of judo, but is relatively rare in the sport of jiu-jitsu. This can be a very, very valuable addition to your triangle arsenal, and we'll be pushing this move very heavily in this video series. The least important statistically of the various triangles that we use, the one which we get the fewest results from, but still a very important part of the system and one which you must become familiar with, is the reverse triangle, or Gyaku Sankaku. Let's understand something. These triangles, all 5, are divided into categories A and B for a very distinct reason. Within each category, whenever you have one of these triangles, you will always have the other as a possible follow-up attack. Within category A, if I ever have a front triangle, if I maneuver my body around my opponent's body, I will always have opportunities to make a switch to a rear triangle or an opposite-sided triangle. Within category B, if I ever have a side triangle, just by moving my body around my opponent's body, I will always have the opportunity to switch to a reverse triangle and vice versa. So understand this. Within a category, if I have one triangle, just by moving my body around my opponent, I will always have the other triangles in that category. Keep this in mind whenever you're employing your triangle training and practice. You will soon start to double or even triple the number of combination triangle attacks that you employ upon your training partners and opponents. This is a very, very important insight and will be heavily featured in this video series. Now it's time for us to look at the central problems of the triangle system. I'm sure you're aware by this time that a big part of my teaching methodology is to identify what are the central problems that we face whenever we go into the main moves that we teach. The first problem with triangles is always going to be the circumference problem. That is, how can I enclose my opponent's shoulders, head, and arm inside the length of my legs? It's never an easy thing, especially if your opponent is powerfully built through the shoulders, to lock up those 3 disparate elements, the head, shoulder, and arm, inside your legs, particularly if you feel you're at a height disadvantage. The answer that we'll be advocating in this video is the shoulder elimination problem. As a general rule, what we want to do is to eliminate our opponent's shoulder from being locked inside of our triangle, and instead focus only upon our opponent's neck and arm. By reducing the content of my opponent's body inside the triangle, we can apply successful triangles in many cases where previously it may have been impossible. The second big problem we face whenever we go to apply triangles, especially the case of front triangles, the most important of the triangles, is the posture problem. How can I prevent my opponent from posturing up and out of my trap triangle when I'm in phase 1 and trying to move towards phase 2 to strangle my opponent? The 3 main methods we'll be using in this video are the knee pull method, the head pull method, and the shin pull method. All 3 are effective methods of preventing our opponent posturing up and away from a trap triangle and preventing us progressing into the figure 4 to complete a stranglehold. The third big problem we face is the stacking problem. How can I prevent my opponent pressuring me with a heavy stack as I attempt to strangle in the figure 4 position? The general method we'll be using in this video series is to scoop grip inside our opponent's leg and work our way to an advantageous angle out to the side. This will simultaneously overcome stacking problems and lifting problems if your opponent is trying to pick you up off the floor. Now, as always, there are a range of general principles that determine the character of the system overall. The first and most important principle of the triangle system is what I often refer to as the multiplicity principle. When most people talk about a triangle, they really only refer to one triangle, and that is the front triangle. Undeniably, the front triangle is statistically the most important of the various triangles that are used in the sport of jiu-jitsu. However, don't let this blind you to the fact that the other 4 triangles, which we'll cover in this video, play an extremely important role. You cannot maximize your effectiveness with triangle work in general by focusing on only one triangle out of the possible 5. If you wish to maximize your effectiveness with triangle attacks, and maximize your application across a broad range of scenarios, you must pay heed to the multiplicity principle and use all 5 triangles. Also, you must understand that once you start to use the triangles together in unison and understand the difference between category A and category B triangles, whenever one of your triangles fails, you'll be able to move on to another. Understanding how to use the 5 triangles as a team rather than relying on the most well-known triangle will greatly increase your effectiveness with the move. The second big principle of this triangle system is the 2 phases principle. Most people just teach the triangle as a move in itself. What we try very hard to emphasize is breaking triangles down into 2 distinct phases. The first phase is the trap triangle phase, where I simply cross my ankles around my opponent's back, trapping the head and the arm. If you look in top-level competition, you will almost always see a regular pattern. Triangles are almost never born fully grown. Rather, they begin as a trap triangle, and over time, the athletes adjust to the figure 4 triangle. The figure 4 triangle is the one which actually strangles your opponent, but it's the trap triangle which is used to first enter and control your opponent. Then there's going to be a period of adjustment where you work your way towards the full figure of 4 and actually strangle someone. By breaking triangles down into 2 distinct phases and understanding exactly what you need to do in both phases and how to get the 2 phases to work together, you will find you become far more effective with your triangle attacks. The third big principle in this triangle system which I teach is the shoulder elimination principle. Too many athletes struggle with triangles because they try to surround too much of their opponent's body when they go to strangle. You will greatly increase your effectiveness with triangle strangulations if you actively look to eliminate your opponent's shoulder from inside the lock of your triangle. This will take away many of the problems commonly associated with triangles in terms of height difference, etc., etc. A fourth critical principle is the division principle. You must learn to divide the various triangles into 2 distinct categories, category A and category B. Understand this: the triangles within each category are closely related to each other, but you cannot jump across categories. I cannot go from a triangle of category A and then switch immediately into category B. The leg configurations simply won't allow that to happen. So if I have a front triangle, I cannot simply unlock it and quickly go into a side triangle. My legs are simply in the wrong position. However, within a category, I can do this. So for example, I can easily go from a front triangle, a Mote Senkaku, to an opposite-sided triangle, Hantai Senkaku. Understanding how we divide the triangles up will make your ability to use them in combination much, much better. The fifth critical principle of the triangle system is the arm isolation principle. You must understand that the setup to every triangle shares something in common. You have to create what we call the one in, one out situation, where one of your opponent's arms gets trapped inside your legs and one of his arms gets trapped outside of your legs. Once you see this as the precursor to every single triangle that you will ever attempt, it becomes a mental image in your mind, and mentally you start to see the possibilities for triangles much more than you did previously. I often coach my students to actively look for the one in, one out possibility as they grapple with their opponents. Once you make this mental association with your opponent's arm position and your legs, the number of triangles you will attempt in a given match will go up dramatically. The sixth main principle of the triangle system is the primacy principle. I put strangles as more valuable as a general rule, not always, but as a general rule, over joint locks. In other words, strangles have primacy over joint locks. Now the great news with triangle attacks is you can attempt both joint locks and strangles at the same time. That's the very nature of triangles, and it's one of their greatest and strongest features. However, whenever you go to attack with triangles, I always coach my athletes, attack the strangle first. Make an honest attempt at strangling your opponent every single time. Don't switch off to a joint lock unless you distinctly and honestly feel that the stranglehold is not there. Work with strangles as the primary element in the Senkaku attacks. Even though both are possible, look heavily to favor one.